Sam is the co-director of JG3 Collaborative, a family philanthropy that funds grassroots power building and social justice initiatives. Through this platform and others, Sam fights to solve social and economic inequities through investment and redistribution of capital to underserved communities around the world. Sam actively serves on a number of organizations focused on a similar mission, including the Right to the City Alliance, Grassroots International, Worth Rises, the Solidaire Network, the Circle for Justice Innovations, and Resource Generation. Welcome, Sam Jacobs, to Arts Funders Forum.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for all the wonderful conversation that's been happening so far.
Thank you. And so, Sam, why don't we start actually with the last organization that I mentioned in your bio, which is one that I think a number of people have heard about, which is Resource Generation, where you serve as a member leader. Tell this community a little bit about what that organization is all about and how you became involved in it.
Sure thing. So Resource Generation is an organization of young people with wealth or who grew up with class privilege, organizing the top 10% of the socioeconomic kind of pile. And what brings members together in RG is a commitment to funding grassroots social movements that are seeking to really alter the balance of power in our society, in our country, in our world. You know, we've got maybe kind of an outsized media presence because of, I guess people are kind of shocked to hear about it. We're an organization of, 1,000 members spread across the country. And for me, I joined RG about 5 years ago. And I think it's probably helpful to share a little bit about kind of how I came up and what was happening kind of in history around me. So I was in high school when the financial crash in '08 happened, which of course was followed by the Occupy movement. And so there was this, kind of big conversation happening across the country about the distribution of wealth. And here I was, someone who grew up with immense privilege, wealth, security, safety, all those things. And then when I was in college was when Mike Brown was murdered in Ferguson, Missouri. And again, massive uprisings about racial injustice. So here I was kind of being politicized by these movements from afar, but feeling like I didn't have a place to fit in. And up popped RG, a place that I really felt like I could contribute to these kind of mass uprisings and struggles for a better world. And in Resource Generation, we do a lot of different work, but we try to think about kind of risk in a different way than I think a lot of wealthy people do and a lot of philanthropists and investors do. In the world of finance, risk is kind of correlated with reward, but for me, when I think about risk, it's less about whether an investment that I make is going to pay off, but something on the level of when a delivery worker gets on his bike to deliver someone's meal, the fact that that person could get mowed down in the street, and that's the kind of skin in the game that most wealthy people don't have in these kind of movements for social justice. And so we're working on trying to kind of break down that taboo about talking about wealth, because we feel like it really only serves to keep the status quo in place.
Sam, thank you for that. Tell the audience a little bit about where specifically capital might flow. When you are out doing all the work that you're doing through different organizations, on today, December 8th, where are you most excited about where potentially millions of dollars of your own money or maybe your peers' money might be flowing to? Where specifically will those investment dollars be going that animate and inspire you the most?
Yeah, there's so much opportunity in the social sector right now to really start investing. And I kind of hesitate to use that word because it implies that there's going to be some return to someone like me, a philanthropist, when I think actually the return is happening when I give my money away. And there's a lot of work happening right now to try to kind of transition our social economic model from one that really relies on extraction, whether that's from the earth, whether that's from working people, especially people of color, to one that's more regenerative, that actually kind of like regenerates itself and relies less on profit motives and things that have kind of put us in this crisis of climate, of racial injustice and kind of economic unrest.
Well, so yeah, and I think it'd be, I think I would encourage, our community to read more about the specific initiatives that RG is behind, that other organizations that you're working on are behind, because I think there's a lot of unknown information about how to actually, either invest or donate or whatever word you want to use to actually solve inequity at scale. And I think it's important that everyone on this call kind of learn more about that and consider how to support that work. This work that we're talking about broadly, Sam, in the recent New York Times feature story about you and your colleagues, does use this word socialist, which as everyone knows in the United States tends to raise a lot of eyebrows. In other parts of the world, it doesn't, depending on where you are. But you do use that label. It's something you, according to the Times piece that you adopted in college. I guess my first question is, how do you define it? And secondly, considering what we just saw play out in the presidential election and the election broadly speaking, how confident are you that the movement has legs and will continue to grow in the US specifically over the next 5-10 years?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I won't lie, the US left is really fledgling and small, especially when you look at it compared to a lot of other countries. But I think what it's about for me is this country is one that like prides itself on innovation, creativity, and what kind of larger, more important creative project than to figure out a path out of these kind of interlocking crises that we're in right now. And as a leftist, I think I have the faith that we really can do better than a society where someone like me controls as much wealth as I do just for showing up, while thousands and thousands of people are dying from COVID because they can't access healthcare or are kind of snowed in by medical debt. And for a long time, the left has really been the moral fiber of this country. If you look at the civil rights movement, if you look at Black Lives Matter, it's really leftists who are kind of pushing things forward. And I think you're right to bring up the election, and it's it's extremely disappointing that the kind of allure of white supremacy is so real for as many millions of people as voted for Donald Trump. But to me, it's also disappointing as a failure of democracy, and socialism means to me more democracy, not just in our government, in our workplace, in our communities, in our homes. It means unlocking the vision of everyone, especially people who've been disenfranchised, Black and Indigenous and other people of color, working class people, queer people, to really contribute to how this world looks. And I think it would be a world that would have a lot more art and a lot more joy in it.
Well, well, good. Well, that does lead us into a question we certainly wanted to raise before we let you go, which is the world of cultural philanthropy, which is what the Arts Funders Forum is designed to help turbocharge. And what we have been arguing and making the point about all along is that there is certainly a lack of affinity for art funding and cultural philanthropy among a rising generation of donors. If you look at the prototypical tech founder or Gen Z or millennial donor, they have other priorities on their plate philanthropically than the arts, generally speaking. How do you personally, and if you want to share a little bit of anecdote around your peers and friends as well, how do you view the arts as a facilitator or a driver of equality and social justice? Do your peers consider the arts worthy of social investment? And what would you say cultural communities, institutions, artists could do better to convince younger philanthropists that the arts are actually a pathway to the goals and aspirations that we're all after?
Yeah, it's a great question. So to kind of break it down into pieces, when I talk to my peers and I see us funding arts and culture, and I think it looks a bit different than the way, say, my grandparents, who are amazing and generous philanthropists, have done it, or my parents have done it. And so for me and for my peers, we think a lot about kind of cultural organizing. How can we use like art and culture to bring people together towards a certain kind of political end? I think of the organization I'm on the board of called Worth Rises, which curated an exhibit of art by currently incarcerated people, made sure to pay them, and used, the kind of interest and all of the buzz around it to help advance some of their campaigns against profiteers in the prison industry. So when we think at least when I think of funding work like that, it requires, of course, the arts and culture to bring people together, but it also requires a lot of methodology and struggle and conversations and politics, and kind of most of all, collective action. And that's one of the things that I think comes up for me the most when I think about things I'm excited about funding and things that my peers like to fund. We've heard a lot, and we've kind of hemmed and hawed together today about some of the funding that's been kind of drying up from the philanthropic sector. And I think it's important to remember that, the philanthropic sector is, it changes extremely slowly. It's super insulated from social forces, and some, loudest internal debates in the sector about whether or not to give multi-year funding. Like, there's a lot of room for creativity there. But also, there's other kind of channels, and we live in a world where I feel like our imaginations have become so limited. But there's a real opportunity, I think, for the arts sector to team up with other parts of the social sector instead of competing for the crumbs that fall off the plates of the uber wealthy, to actually get together and organize to unlock other revenue streams, to unlock government funding and things like that, and which could really, I think, shift us away from kind of just depending on the largesse of mega donors, and really open up a lot of new possibilities, both politically, culturally, artistically.
Fantastic. Well, Sam, that's a wonderful message and a great way to end. We have been trying to be a platform that promotes this concept of counterintuitive, creative partnerships that often occur between the arts sector and social impact areas of philanthropy that are outside the arts sector. And I think you've just illustrated that point beautifully and helped to drive that point home. And we hope that we can continue to see more of that and mapping of the impact of the arts to other global challenges as well. And hopefully that'll continue to make a real impact. So thank you, Sam. Your influence is rising. We're so grateful to have you with us today and for sharing with us. And we hope to speak to you again soon.
Thanks for inviting me. Thanks everyone for being here.